Knights and Bankers, Secrets of the Knights Templar. Welcome, dear listeners. Thank you for choosing our podcast, where we dive into the most fascinating labyrinths of history. Today, we will travel to the very heart of the Middle Ages, to the origins of one of the most powerful, mysterious, and tragic organizations of all time. Picture this: an order of warrior monks, poor knights of Christ, guarding pilgrims. But how did they become the financial geniuses who created the first international banking system? How did a humble brotherhood become a giant corporation whose wealth and influence eclipsed kings? And what led to their sudden and terrible downfall? Overnight arrests, torture, burnings, and curses that seemed to come true. We follow the Templars from their founding at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem to their final battle in Acre and that fateful Friday the 13th in Paris. Their treasures, including the Holy Grail, are said to have disappeared. Their curse is said to have haunted the kings of France for centuries. Is it true? Get ready to learn the story of the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. A story of faith, money, power, and betrayal. This is the story of the Templars. Let's begin. Chapter 1: Birth of the Templars. Our story begins after the First Crusade. In 1119 or 1120, a French knight named Hugues de Payens appears in Jerusalem at the court of King Baldwin II. He has 9 or 18 companions with him. They see the terrible fate of pilgrims going to the Holy Land. They are robbed and killed on the roads. The knights approach the king with a proposal. They want to protect the pilgrims along their entire journey, and to do it free of charge in the name of faith. King Baldwin was inspired by their sincerity and gave them a place to live on the Temple Mount, in a wing of the royal palace, which the Crusaders identified with the Temple of Solomon or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is where their name came from: Knights of the Temple, Templars, or in French, Templar, Temple. This is how the first Templars appeared in the Holy Land. The idea of a knightly order combining monastic vows with the military duty of protecting pilgrims and Christian lands proved powerful. News of the new order quickly spread throughout Western Europe. It became prestigious to join. It was a path to glory and service to Christ. The order began to grow rapidly, attracting knights and nobles from all over Europe. Chapter 2: The Charter, the Bull, and the Rise of Power. At first, the Templars did not have a clear charter. It was later created by one of the most influential religious figures of that time, Bernard of Clairvaux. A preacher of the Second Crusade, a mentor to the popes, Bernard wrote a strict charter regulating the lives of the brothers: poverty, chastity, obedience, prayer, helping the poor, and of course, war with the infidels. But the real breakthrough came in 1139. Pope Innocent II issued a bull, papal decree, called Omni Date Optimum. Every gift is perfect. This document was revolutionary. The Templars were subordinate only to the Pope. They were exempt from all taxes. They were granted the right to move freely throughout any land. In fact, a new powerful structure had emerged in Western Europe, above the kings and local nobility, answerable only to Rome. No one could have imagined what this would lead to.
For now, the Templars were the special forces of the Crusaders in the Holy Land, renowned for their bravery and discipline in battles, such as Montesa in 1167 or Ramla in 1177. Chapter 3. Life and Vows of the White Cloak. It was an honor to join the Templar order, but the life of an ordinary brother was a harsh asceticism. Imagine a knight in chainmail and armor, over which is the famous white cloak with a scarlet cross. This cloak became their symbol for centuries. The knight renounced worldly goods. He took a vow of celibacy. He was forbidden even to hug or kiss his mother or sister. Food was simple: bread, water, vegetables. Fruit was a rare delicacy on holidays. Life consisted of prayers, helping the poor. Every knight was obliged to do this, and battles. Although they were not formally monks, their way of life, asceticism, poverty, severity, and constant prayers made their life very close to monastic. The order emphasized poverty. Their seal depicted two knights on one horse, a symbol of the absence of excess property, although later this seal would become the reason for vile accusations. The 72-point charter regulated everything. Two key prohibitions: killing Christians, which, alas, was violated, and retreating in battle. The Templars were famous as elite warriors who almost never surrendered. Violators of the charter faced severe punishments, from flogging and expulsion from the order, the most terrible, deprivation of the cloak with the cross, to many years of imprisonment in the stocks on bread and water. The master of the order had absolute power. His orders were carried out unquestioningly.
Chapter 4. The Empire of Money. How the Templars became the first bankers. Where did the poor knights get their legendary untold treasures? There were several sources of wealth, all of which were in full operation thanks to papal privileges, especially tax exemption. 1. Entry fee and inheritance. Knights who joined the order, both poor and rich, gave it all of their property. Influential families and noble houses did the same, seeing it as a godly deed. The order instantly received lands, castles, money. 2. Roads and infrastructure. To protect pilgrims, the Templars created an extensive network of roads throughout Europe and the Middle East. Their roads were free, but along them they built inns, innkeepers where travelers could rest and eat. This brought in a huge amount of tax-free income. 3. Sea transport. The Templars were licensed to operate a fleet in the Mediterranean. They transported merchants, pilgrims, diplomatic pouches, and charged a fee for it. Again, no taxes. 4. Managing conflict assets. In feudal Europe, there were constant disputes over land. If an owner was afraid that his property would be taken away, even if he had documents, he would hand it over to the Templars for management. Taking something away from the order, which answered only to the Pope, was almost impossible. This protection also had to be paid for. 5. Wills. They were bequeathed entire provinces. For example, the King of Aragon, Alfonso I the Conqueror, bequeathed his kingdoms of Aragon and Navarre to the Templars. Although they did not receive the lands directly, they were paid a huge monetary compensation. 6. Usury, undercover. Huge, free funds were accumulating in the order's treasury. They had to be put to use. But the Church forbade usury, lending money at interest. The Templars found a loophole. They simply inflated the amount of the debt in the contract, thus hiding their commission. Their rates, around 10%, were several times lower than those of the Jews, 25 to 40%, or Italian merchants, 30 to 40%. It was profitable to work with them. Brilliant invention.
cashless payments. Transporting large sums of cash between countries was mortally dangerous because of robbers, often knights. The Templars came up with a system that became the prototype of modern bank transfers and credit cards. You hand over, for example, 1,000 gold to the order's branch in Milan. You're given a check, bill of exchange, with a description of the amount and your fingerprint, your signature. You're going to Paris without money. Present the receipt at the local Templar branch. You get your 1,000 gold, minus a small commission. This was the first international cashless financial system in Western Europe and possibly in the world.
Chapter 5. The Giant Corporation, Structure and Influence. It was impossible to govern such an empire without a clear structure. The order was divided into 10 provinces: Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, the main ones in the east, France, England, Poitou, Anjou, Portugal, Apulia, Hungary. The provinces were divided into commanderies and priorities, and those into houses. At the head stood the Grand Master, an absolute ruler, subordinate only to the Pope. He was surrounded by a complex hierarchy: a visitor, a cleric who inspected the order's monasteries, a seneschal. He was in charge of supplies and everyday life, was the chief advisor to the master and replaced him. The marshal, responsible for military training and commanded troops on campaign, if not led by the master himself. Commanders of the 3 eastern provinces, Jerusalem, Tripoli, and Antioch, had their own troops and marshals and were subordinate only to the master and the general chapter, an assembly of senior officials. Chatelaine, they controlled castles. The Templars built many powerful fortresses and even Gothic cathedrals. Legends attribute this to secret knowledge or the adoption of advanced Middle Eastern fortifications. Housekeepers, sergeants, managed the order's rural holdings, vast estates with fields, pastures, and workers. It was an agro-industrial complex. Brother knights and sergeants' convents, the main military force, in white cloaks with scarlet crosses. They were entitled to up to 3 horses. Turcopoles, light cavalry recruited from local mercenaries in the Middle East. Untermarschall, commanded sergeants in battle. Standard-bearer, an extremely important figure. He carried the order standard, its loss is the greatest crime, and gave signals with flags in battle, the only way to control knights in solid armor. And clothmaker, responsible for the brothers' clothes and cloaks. It was a giant transnational corporation that combined finance, diplomacy, agriculture, logistics, and powerful private military forces. It was not subordinate to kings, had colossal money and connections. They carried diplomatic mail, knew secrets, lent money to kings and the Pope himself. Their influence was enormous. In London, the Temple district still bears their name, and the head of the English Templars sat in the royal parliament. Chapter 6. Wars, Glory, and Shame in the Holy Land. The Templars were indeed excellent warriors, the special forces of the Crusaders, but their history in the Middle East knew both glorious and shameful pages. Shame. In 1187, Grand Master Gerard de Riedefort was captured by the brilliant Saladin after the Battle of Hattin. He spent some time in captivity and was released. Rumors began to spread that he had bought his freedom by converting to Islam. This legend would later be remembered by the French king. Triumph. In 1191, Richard the Lionheart recaptured the important port of Acre from the Muslims. The city became the new capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem,
after the loss of Jerusalem itself and the second main headquarters of the Templars in the east for a full 100 years. Competition and dirt. Acre was also home to their main competitors, the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Order. There was a fierce struggle between the orders. The Templars actively participated in the civil wars, for example, supporting the warring Italian trading republics, Genoa and Venice. In 1241, they even conspired with Muslim Damascus against the Hospitallers and Teutons and brutally slaughtered their Christian colleagues in skirmishes, grossly violating their own charter. Their main objective? Despite their dubious alliances, the Templars remained the main military force of the Crusader states, fighting Muslim rulers. But by the end of the 13th century, the Crusades had lost popularity, especially after the sack of Christian Constantinople in 1204, and the influx of people from Europe dried up. One by one, Muslim states recaptured the lands of the Crusaders.
Chapter 7. The Fall of Acre, the Last Battle. By 1291, Acre was the last major Crusader stronghold in the Middle East. The city cried out for help. The Pope sent 1,600 Lombard mercenaries, but he didn't say who would pay them. Neither the King of Cyprus nor the people of Acre wanted to pay. The mercenaries, left without money, went beyond the walls and began to plunder the surrounding area, killing and raping local Muslims. This became a pretext for the Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil to gather a huge army, according to various estimates, 40 to 100,000. In the spring of 1291, he besieged Acre. There were about 15,000 defenders in the city, Templars, Hospitallers, Teutons, royal troops. Epic siege. The Mamluks brought giant siege weapons with names, mighty, merciless. Acre had strong walls and access to the sea for supplying supplies. The defenders resisted desperately. They doused the attackers with boiling water and resin and fired at them with crossbows. The Templars used a fleet with catapults, firing at the Mamluks from the sea. One ship even overloaded and sunk. There was an attempt at a night cavalry sortie, which ended in chaos and the death of the commander. Rumor has it that he drowned in a cesspool. The evacuation of civilians onto ships began. Many drowned, including the Patriarch. The Templars managed to take their treasury to Cyprus and covered their retreat. The last defenders took refuge in the mighty Templar castle. The last feat and betrayal. The Mamluks, suffering heavy losses, offered the Templars to surrender, to come out with weapons and banners and board the ships. They agreed. But when a group of Templars and civilians were leaving the castle, the Mamluk commander, unaware of the treaty, tried to rob them. The Templars gave battle. The Sultan, having received a distorted report about the violation of the truce, ordered the storming of the castle. About 200 people, including the Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, who had been mortally wounded by an arrow even earlier and died, telling the retreating, "Don't you see, I'm not running, I'm dying," held out to the end. On May 28th, sappers blew up the main tower of the castle. The last defenders of Acre died. The era of the Crusader states was over.
Chapter 8. Return to Europe and the growing threat. After the fall of Acre, the Templars moved to Europe, making their headquarters the powerful fortress of the Temple in the very center of Paris. Their power in Europe seemed unshakable. Lands, castles, money, influence, debtors among the highest nobility and clergy. But clouds were gathering over them in the person of the French king, Philip IV, nicknamed the Handsome. Philip was a cruel, cunning, and ambitious ruler. He waged incessant wars with England, Flanders, strengthening royal power and creating a centralized state. Wars required huge amounts of money. Philip's financial policy. He systematically robbed Jews, accusing them of ritual murders, blasphemy, expelled them and confiscated their property, hence the name Jewish Island in Paris. He extorted money from Italian usurers and unwanted aristocrats. He waged a fierce struggle with the Pope for supremacy. War with the papacy. The conflict with Pope Boniface VIII came to a head. Philip banned the export of valuables from France, depriving the Pope of income. Boniface summoned the king to Rome for trial. Philip responded by convening the General States, 1702, an assembly of representatives of the estates that supported the king against the Pope, an important step towards a national state. Philip's agents, according to rumors, seized Boniface at his residence in Anagni. The old pope soon died of shock. Avignon captivity of the popes. Philip, arguing that Rome was unsafe, invited the popes to move to Avignon in South France, 1309. This began the period of the Avignon captivity of the popes, in which the popes, often French in origin, were under the direct control of the French crown. The first such pope was Clement V.
Chapter 9. Friday the 13th. Arrest and Crash. Philip the Fair defeated his internal enemies, defeated the Pope. His gaze fell on the last force not controlled by the crown in France, the Order of the Templars. They had lands, castles, money, influential supporters and debtors. Pope Clement V himself and Philip owed them huge sums. Legend has it that during the uprising in Paris, 1306, Philip took refuge in the temple and was amazed by the treasures he saw there. Preparing the strike. Philip began preparing an unprecedented operation, the simultaneous arrest of all the Templars in France. In parallel, a powerful propaganda campaign was launched. The Templars were accused of monstrous heresies, denial of Christ and spitting on the cross upon entry, worship of the idol Baphomet, the horned goat, Satan, supposedly golden with emerald eyes, kissing this idol in indecent places, sodomy and sodomy. The seal with two knights on one horse was interpreted as proof of homosexuality. Cannibalism, the ashes of dead brothers were mixed into food. Personal visit to Satan's meals. Secret acceptance of Islav, remembered the story of the captured master. Friday, October 13th, 1307, the day of the funeral of the king's daughter-in-law. Grand Master Jacques de Molay is the chief steward, next to the king. Nothing foreshadows trouble. And the next morning, on Friday the 13th, this is where the bad reputation of this date comes from, mass arrests begin throughout France. Jacques de Molay, his closest comrade Auguste de Perrot, and hundreds of knights are captured. They are thrown into prison. Why did the powerful order not resist? They probably considered themselves invulnerable, hoping for the Pope's protection or to buy themselves off with money. After all, they obeyed only the Pope.
Chapter 10. Judgment, Damnation, and the End of the Order. A long trial began, 1307 to 1311. The Templars were cruelly tortured by the Inquisition. Under torture, even the Grand Master and the highest ranks admitted their guilt in all the monstrous accusations. Many could not withstand the torture and died. Pope Clement V, completely dependent on Philip, did not intercede. Moreover, he became an active participant in the process. In October 1311, the Council of Vienne, presided over by the Pope, decided to dissolve the Order of the Templars. The order's property was confiscated. Formerly, it was handed over to the Knights Hospitallers as a poor order. But Philip the Fair quickly found a pretext, legal costs, to take most of the money back to the treasury. The bulk of the legendary Templar treasures disappeared without a trace. According to legend, they managed to take them out on the eve of the arrests to Spain, where the suddenly rich Order of Montesa arose, and Portugal, where the Order of Christ was created, whose caravels with Templar crosses on their sails would later discover new lands. Execution and curse. On March 18, 1314, dates vary. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, and the commander of Normandy, Geoffrey de Charnay, were burned alive as persistent heretics on the Ile de Jouesse in Paris. Before his execution, de Molay recanted all the confessions extracted under torture. From the stake, he shouted a curse. To Pope Clement V, "Not a year will pass before I summon you to the judgment of God." Clement died of dysentery on April 20, 1314. To King Philip the Fair, "Before a year has passed, I will summon you also to the judgment of God. I curse your family to the 13th generation." Philip died of a stroke while hunting on November 29, 1314. The curse of the Capetians. Philip's children, Louis X, Philip V, Charles IV, died young, leaving no male heirs. The Capetian dynasty died out in 1328. During the execution of Louis XVI in 1793, legend has it that a man jumped on the scaffold, dipped his hand in the king's blood, and cried, "Jacques de Molay, you are avenged." Thus ended the history of the greatest organization of the Middle Ages. Their spirit and symbols survived them. In the Order of Montesa and Christ, in the Rosicrucians, in the Masonic lodges that consider the Templars their forerunners, even in modern organizations like the Children of Jacques de Molay. But with their fall, the era of Crusades and chivalric romance ended. The era of strong national states and absolute monarchies began. Many historians consider the Templars to be innocent victims of royal greed and political intrigue, slandered in order to take away their wealth and power. Is this true? It is up to you to decide. But their story will forever remain one of the most exciting and tragic pages in the history of humanity.
Conclusion. So, we have come a long way from a humble brotherhood of pilgrims, protectors at the Temple of Solomon, to the heights of power and authority, and then to the abyss of betrayal, torture, and the flames of the fire on the Jewish island. The history of the Templar Order is a mirror of the Middle Ages in all its complexity, selfless faith and cynical calculation, knightly honor and the cruelty of war, monastic asceticism and financial genius, which created the prototype of modern banking. They were more than knights or monks. They were the world's first transnational corporation, a state within a state whose influence stretched from Jerusalem to London to Paris. Their fall was not just the end of an order, it was the end of an era in which the authority of the Pope and the ideals of the Crusaders could rival that of kings. Their collapse cleared the way for the birth of the strong nation-states of Europe. The curse of Jacques de Molay, the mystery of their lost treasures, including the Grail, perhaps, their legacy in Freemasonry, all this continues to excite the minds 7 centuries later. Were they holy martyrs or secret heretics, victims of slander, or an organization steeped in sin? There is no clear answer, but their story, full of grandeur, intrigue, and tragedy, is forever inscribed in the annals of human civilization. Thank you very much, dear listeners, for joining us in this deep dive into the past. We hope you found it as interesting as we did. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends and leave a review. Stay tuned. New exciting journeys through the labyrinths of history await you ahead. Until we meet again on air.